I think books and especially children's books are a great way to communicate a lot about the environment, about nature, and also about being kind and empathetic towards people, which I feel
Oh,
is
yes.
really the need of the hour. I think it's not just about introducing them to nature. What I find very interesting about a lot of books that I read are that they talk about stories from specific communities and what happens in, so mine, of course, what happens in Kodaikanal. And it's more than just talking about the environment or about nature. It's also about specific and unrecognized stories coming into the limelight. Tourism has not really been great for Kodi. In the sense, I think there should be more of a regulation when it comes to tourism. And in the Guardians of the Forest, the book addresses how tourists are irresponsible when they come to the forest, the mountains, and they just do as they please because they have a sense of it's vacation. I can do whatever I want without really considering how fragile the landscape and the environment there is, and how sensitive animals are towards things like garbage being thrown here and there, and all of that. The myth of the wild boar uses folklore, like you said, and over there. So as I was growing up in Kodi, I grew up with a lot of local myths and narratives. And one thing that the locals would always tell people is that you shouldn't be going close to a wild boar because it when it breathes fire. So its breath is very powerful. And Kodi, the wild boar is not harmed in any way. Of course, people now in the local community are used to seeing boars all the time in their backyards, and I think what is not happening is creating more awareness as to why they are there to begin with. So I think those conversations are very important, and that is what will help us understand that it's because of certain reasons like construction and building resorts and all of that, which are really impacting the grazing land of the wild boars. And that is why they have moved into the town to find food and water. So I think rather than saying okay, it's fine that a wild boar is on the street, you should have conversations about why they are there to begin with. So I think it's important that both tourists and the locals who live there embrace the culture there and try to find out a little bit more about how the honey collectors live and their connection towards nature. Really see them as a source of knowledge, and we don't respect them for who they are. So I think that brings us to a larger question of how we treat them in India and what we are doing to conserve their practices. All the books that I write have that element of mystery and suspense. That is my starting point. So when children, they are very fascinated by nature, they're curious, and like I said, especially with the wild boar, they really want to know more, and they want to know how much it weighs and how big its horns are, and all of that. So I think what is important is that we have to take that curiosity, sustain that curiosity, and build it to something else.
Hello and welcome to Go Green Guru Sustainability in Action. I'm your host Ananya Sangameshwar. We have some wonderful episodes coming up, so do like, share, and subscribe and be a part of our stories. Oh, I'm so excited about today's episode. I'm talking to Priyadarshini. So she's an author and environmental fiction author, and she's also a storyteller and a teacher. And she's such an interesting person. Like the way she thinks of stories, and it all comes from her life. Her stories are inspired from her childhood at Kodaikanal. That's where she's from. She's from the hills, and that personal touch in her stories, and then the mystery she brings. Like she knows how to make it hooking, how to get people into the narrative, how to get people interested, and it's so good. And we had such a layered conversation today. It was we talk about the themes in our books, the about tourism in Kodaikanal and how it impacts it, about the human animal relationships, conflicts, and coexistence, uh, about literary techniques, how to bring nature alive in books, in stories, in our life, how to bring that nature education. So there's a lot of things we talk about, and it was such a fulfilling conversation, and I hope you have as much fun listening to it as we did having this conversation. So let's go. Hello, Priyadarshini. A very warm welcome to Go Green Guru. Uh, I'm so excited to speak with you today because I'm also really interested in literature, stories, and nature, of course. So this is going to be a really fun conversation.
Thank you so much for having me over, Ananya. And I'm really, really excited for this conversation. And I'm excited to hear what all questions you have for me. And I've been seeing your work regularly, and it's really exciting and fun. And I'm really glad that I can tell your audience and your viewers a little bit about myself and about nature and why I do what I do, basically.
Oh yes, definitely. Yeah, we met at an open mic. I remember virtual open mic by Youth for India. So you had shared some wonderful excerpts from your novel. I done some poetry, so it was a really soulful thing. So art has so much potential to just stir so many emotions and thoughts and make us really reflect. So yeah, that's just so powerful and beautiful, I feel.
Absolutely. And I think books, and especially children's books, are a great way to communicate a lot about the environment, about nature, and also about being kind and empathetic towards people, which I feel
Oh
is
yes.
really the need of the hour.
Oh yes. So let's before we dive deeper, so maybe you could just give a little background about yourself and tell us more about yourself and why you do what you do.
All right. So, yes, so I'm Priyadarshini and I come from the Western Ghats. I come from Kodaikanal, Tamil Nadu, India. And so I was born there and I grew up there as well. And when I was growing up, I've always had a very deep connection towards nature. And I think all mountain people grow up with that connection. So every morning when I would wake up and when I would open my door, I would often find the wild boars or the Indian bison right on my lawn. And so that is how connected we were to nature, because all these wild animals which which other people think of as exotic or strange, they are actually, they we grew up with them. So I've always had that connection towards nature. And what really inspired me to write though is how I've seen nature changing. So as I was growing up, as I was, becoming from a little kid, as I was becoming a teenager, I saw a lot of changes in the environment as well, and how slowly things were getting destroyed, and how trees were being cut, and how animals that are supposed to be in the forests are slowly moving into the town. So all of these changes are what really inspired me to write my books.
Yeah, that's nice to know. And I believe you're also a teacher and a storyteller. And so, yeah, that's really nice how you work with young children to actually, nurture them or help them, think about different things. So, what do you think about stories? What do stories really do for you?
Yeah. So for me, stories are very, very powerful, and they are a very, very powerful medium to communicate a message. And for me, the reason why I like writing stories and sharing stories with the younger generation is because I feel like I see a lot of hope in them. And even as a teacher, I work with very young kids, and I feel like they have genuine curiosity about the environment. They have genuine interest in the environment, and I also want to communicate to them that the environment may be beautiful, it may be aesthetic, it might give you a very good feeling, but there are also a lot of things happening in the environment which they should be aware of. And I think stories are a great way to, to make kids more aware of what is happening out there. And even if you look at my own hometown, Kodaikanal, a lot of people only know of it as a hill station, as a tourist space where they can relax, where they can enjoy. In almost every storytelling session that I've gone for, people immediately brighten up when I say Kodaikanal and say, oh, we've gone there with our family because it's a tourist place. But then when I talk about the other part of other sides of Kodi, so for example, when I ask, so have you seen a wild boar, or do you know about the animals and plants that live in Kodaikanal? They give me very blank expressions. So I feel like a lot needs to be done in terms of, just making people more aware of what really happens and what really exists in our country.
Yeah, it's a way for us to connect further, right? So, do you think like stories play a role in helping us empathize? How do you think they can do that actually?
Yeah.
Making children empathize with different situations.
Yes. So empathy, the way I do it in my books is that I do it through two ways. One is, of course, creating more empathy for where I come from, the land that I come from. And I just want people to see a very different side to it. And that is one way in which I want people to be more empathetic towards the mountains and hill stations of India and really be aware of what is going on. But the other way that I do it is through my characters. So, for example, if you take my book, The Myth of the Wild God, the protagonist is a young tribal girl, and she's the one who spearheads the movement to protect the wild boars. So for me, that is really, really important that my characters are kind towards each other, they're empathetic towards each other, and they also fight for a cause. So if you look at the character of Tani, she's extremely kind. She is also extremely protective of her land, and she's also very kind towards her teacher, her classmates, her friends, all of them. But at the same time, she's also strong, she's bold, she's assertive, she fights for what she really values. So I think through characterization, it's really important for kids to know that, you can be kind, but at the same time, you have to stand up for important values as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So then you get to see different scenarios play out, and then it's like a role model also. Like you get people, characters your age, and you can relate to them, and then learn about different possible ways of being, right? So yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I remember there's something I'd read. Amitav Ghosh, he's also an environmental author. So he used to talk about how, like today, there's a crisis in terms of environment, and it's most one of the reasons he gives is we don't have much of nature in our stories today. So like that's why there's a huge disconnect with nature. We don't really care about it that much or empathize or really know about it much. So he says, and even if we do mention nature, it's like just an afterthought, like a background or a setting, right? So he said we should give more agency to nature in our novels, make them also characters. So what do you think about these ideas?
I think it's a beautiful idea. And interestingly, I mean, I just got reminded of this when you said this. So when I first started writing my books, and the first book that I wrote was called The Postwoman and Other Stories. And I sent it to Zai Whittaker, of course, a very famous environmentalist and conservationist. And when she read the book, and she's also introduced the book. So when she read the book, she told me, Priya, so this is what ecofiction is. And I had no idea what ecofiction is at that point of time. It's just that, it's just something that naturally came to me because of my upbringing and the values, how much I valued nature as I was growing up and all of that. And that is when I realized that, nature, but in that book, so nature was more of a backdrop. Like you said, it was more of, and I focused more on the aesthetic part of it, how it makes you feel and all that. But that is when I realized, after a conversation with Zaya, I realized that nature also has to be a little bit more than just aesthetics and beauty and us feeling good about it. And it really has to reach out to people that, the nature is also getting destroyed, and nature, and how important nature is for our well-being, and the world would not exist without nature. So that, I think, is an active role of nature is what is very important. And so in my later books, actually, The Myth of the Wild God and The Guardians of the Forest, that's what I've tried to do. And in The Guardians of the Forest, actually, many aspects of nature come alive, and they form a alliance with the kids, and it's a very interesting mysterious story. But nature has a very strong agency there as well. And of course, in The Myth of the wild god themselves, they have an identity of their own. And by the end of the book, you end up falling in love with them. So, yeah. So it's really important for nature to really take the focus point and not just be the backdrop or the aesthetic part of it, or, all of that.
Yeah, and if you notice, a lot of our fairy tales, like children's stories, like nature is alive in that, right? A lot.
Yes.
So, and it brings in lot more magic. So if you see the world that way, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So there's one more thing. So I was discussing these something with my friends the other day in class. So perhaps have you heard of Peter Wohlben? So there's these book series like The Secret Hidden Life of Trees and all of that.
Yes.
So where we talk about the different things related to trees, right? So how plants are also alive, how they also communicate with each other
Yeah.
using the fungal networks called the wood wide web, and how they send messages. They also feel things. So it's a lot of human characteristics which we can empathize with, right? So those are some things like so when you give human characteristics, when you look at nature through those things, it helps us see nature. So but so what do you think about this idea of anthropomorphizing nature, in the sense giving these human like characteristics for us to empathize with them? Do you feel that's the way to go, or how do you think we can really empathize with nature? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think that again that's very important, because I feel like only if nature has a voice and we represent that. I mean, of course, we all know that nature already has a voice. It's just that we are not listening enough and carefully enough to really hear it. But what I'm saying is, if we make a more conscious effort to represent that, it makes a huge difference. Because again, I'm going to be referring to The Guardians of the Forest, my second novella. So over there, actually, I don't want to give too much away, but then towards the end of the book, the animals come up and they speak, and then they tell us what is happening to the forest, to the environment, and then they actually have a conversation with the children. So it's really nice, and the reason why I actually made a conscious effort to kind of do that is because I know that kids and adults both, whoever's reading my book, they'll feel a lot more empathy towards what is happening, and they'll feel more connected, because they will feel like they're listening to this story from the perspective of the victims, all those who are on the other side of progress, of development, of deforestation, and all that. So I think it's a great technique, especially to use in children's books, because they really make kids think. And one thing about kids is that they love animals and they have a natural curiosity towards animals. So to stir more of that curiosity, I think such techniques really do help.
So yeah, and you were mentioning more about your experiences in Kodaikanal and how you use that in your novel, right? And how the idea of tourism in Kodaikanal. I think you're talking about that in one of your book introductions as well. So maybe could you elaborate more on the idea of tourism in Kodaikanal?
Yeah. So again, as I was growing up, one thing that I noticed is that when I was a very small child in Kodi, of course, tourists would only come during particular seasons. So it was a very seasonal thing. They would come either in during summer, or during, say, for example, the Diwali holidays. It was a very short span of time when there would be tourists in Kodi, and even then there was never a traffic block or road congestion, and none of that sort used to happen. However, when as I was growing up, I realized that the whole idea of seasonal tourists, them coming only during that period of time, completely vanished. So we had tourists year round. Throughout the year, people would start coming, and actually this year there was the introduction of the e-pass, and that really points to how many people are coming to Kodi. Because of such large volumes, the government actually had to introduce the e-pass, where but I mean, the pass didn't make such a difference in terms of who could come and who couldn't. It was just more in terms of keeping a record of how many people are visiting the mountains. So tourism is becoming a very big problem. And actually, the other day I was talking to a nature educator and expert who lives in Kodaikanal, and she's worked in Kodi for a very long time. And she was telling me that the tourism, especially, it saw an increase during COVID. So during COVID is the time when a lot of resorts were built in Kodi, and the whole advertising of escape into nature and also stay away from COVID kind of like that's how it was promoted and advertised. And the 2 years of COVID really saw a rise in a lot of resorts and a lot of hotels that keep advertising and promoting. And yeah, so a lot of this has led to a lot of tourism, and tourism has not really been great for Kodi, in the sense that the place is completely trashed and littered, and also there's a lot of traffic congestion, and it really bothers the animals that exist there. So I think there should be more of a regulation when it comes to tourism. And in The Guardians of the Forest, the book addresses how tourists are irresponsible when they come to the forest, the mountains, and they just do as they please, because they have a sense of, it's vacation, I can do whatever I want, without really considering how fragile the landscape and the environment there is, and how sensitive animals are towards things like garbage being thrown here and there, and all of that.
I think Kodaikanal also came in the news or in people's minds a lot during some of the movies, right? Like Manjumal Boys and all. It was like a huge thing. And it also talks about the idea of going into unexplored, dangerous places and, keeping on life also. It endangers our own life also. So,
Yeah,
yeah, keeping on
and then I just want to quickly mention something about Manjumal Boys because you talked about it, and I just found it so fascinating because, to be honest, for the locals, right, the Guna Caves is not as fascinating as what it's shown in the movie, right? And also because actually many people who I know as well have actually visited the Guna Caves and they've explored, and of course during the time when it was still open, right? So all of them they feel like, yeah, what's the great hype about, So it's just quite fascinating because a lot of older Kodi residents especially have visited the cave multiple times, and they all have the same opinion that yes, of course it's a dangerous place and it's not an easy terrain to walk on, but they also have told me that you need to be an experienced hiker or a trekker and you need to know mountain terrain before you just walk into the cave. So we've had quite a few interesting discussions about that too. But definitely, I mean, you're right. After the movie was released, the number of e-passes to Kodi also increased.
Yeah, so that raises an important point. Ki, okay, respect a place and then learn about it as you try to even explore it, right? So what do you think is the solution for this? Like, do you think there can be a responsible kind of ecotourism, or is tourism itself bad? Like, what is your take on this whole
Okay,
thing?
so there has to be. I'm going to particularly talk about Kodaikanal because I'm also familiar with the economics there and all that. So for Kodaikanal, tourism is important because many of the locals actually depend on the income that comes from tourism. But at the same time, it it of course it has to be responsible tourism because, like I said before, when I was growing up, it was a seasonal thing where tourists would come in the summer, or only when there was that the break period, right, during Dashara holidays or Diwali holidays. But now you see them throughout the year. So, and that too in large crowds. So I think there should be some kind of regulation for that. Wiping away tourism entirely is not going to do any good. But along with ecotourism, what would really benefit is conversations on the landscape there, the animals there, the plants there, and all of that. So, for example, tourists who see wild boars walking on the roads, they are quite, I don't know, many of them actually throw rocks at them. And, so I've seen quite a lot of this happening as well. So I think more of an awareness program also has to be done to talk about why these animals are important and why they are out into the town to begin with, right? So I think that would really help along with the whole sustainable and ecotourism. And of course, we would love visitors, but just not to completely destroy the mountain and go away. So yeah.
So yeah, some kind of regulations around it, some basic responsibilities, like,
Yes.
okay, do be safe, or like don't litter, and also respect people,
Yes.
place, all of that. Yeah. Uh, and also, do you think the idea of slow travel, like where you go to a space, experience the space as a local, or like, what do you think about that?
I think that's extremely important. And even in, say, a place like Kodi, in fact, the people who actually, the oldest people who exist there are the tribal communities and, people from the honey collector tribes and all of that. And of course, like I said, the protagonist of the myth of the wild god, she does belong to the honey collector community. So I think they are the people who have always historically preserved the environment and nature and all of that, and their relationship with bees and all the, in fact, all the other animals around them are very special and unique. So I think it is when we visit, and not just as tourists, I think even a lot of members who are part of the Kodaikanal locality, they're not native to Kodi, right? So they are people who've come from elsewhere and who've settled in the mountains for various reasons. So I think it's important that both tourists and the locals who live there embrace the culture there and try to find out a little bit more about how the honey collectors live and their connection towards nature. Actually, the honey collectors also have a lot of wonderful festivals with regard to nature and rituals and all that. So finding out a little bit more about that is going to be really nice because even though we don't participate in it, it'll give us an idea as to how um, traditionally and in ancient forms of conservation practices did exist. So that would really help all of us to understand more about nature.
Oh, did you have any experiences with all of this, like understanding the local communities or the tribal customs and all of
So
that?
not as much as I would like, to be very honest, because now they are a fragmented people, so they don't exist in large numbers like how they used to. And a couple of them do exist, and most of them have also moved out from the forest. And those who do still practice, say, the ancient rituals and all that, they do it more to get honey from the beehives, and that honey is very valuable and all of that. But they also, we see a distance in within themselves also, in the sense they have now slowly stopped practicing the traditional and ancient rituals that they had always been practicing and their ancestors were already practicing. So I think it'll be quite an interesting venture to see who are the remaining people, and to kind of gather their narratives and really, kind of form a larger picture of what their life was really like. So yeah, because actually many of them have now moved into the town and they're now in search of other jobs. It's also because I think it relates back to how much we value the tribal communities, and really how much, like, and you, of course, throughout India we have very less value for them, and we don't really see them as a source of knowledge, and we don't respect them for who they are. So I think that brings us to a larger question of how we treat them in India and what we are doing to conserve their practices.
Yeah, that's a really important point you raised. Yeah. So, okay, so then tell us a little more about Guardians of the Forest and how you brought in those mystical elements and maybe different. I think you also brought in folklore into it. So, how do you weave them into narratives?
Yeah. So so Guardians of the Forest has a little bit of magic realism, I would say, because you have a lot of magical elements going on and animals talking, and there's a lot of mystery as well. So the reason why I use that technique is because I felt all my stories, I feel like they should also be appealing to people, because in general there's a notion that environmental literature and fiction is very boring. So whenever kids read my books, this is what they tell me. They say, "Okay, ma'am, it was really like reading a detective story or a mystery novel, because it has all those elements." And the reason why I included, say, the whole aspect of a little bit of magic realism is because I want people to understand and break the notion that ecofiction is boring and it is mundane and it only talks about facts. So that is a techniques used in that book. And in the myth of the wild goat, the myth of the wild goat uses folklore, like you said. And over there, so as I was growing up in Kodi, I grew up with a lot of local myths and narratives. And one thing that the locals would always tell people is that you shouldn't be going close to a wild goat, because it when it breathes fire. So its breath is very powerful, and never go near its tongue, because if it licks you even once, your skin will burn up and shrivel up. And so as a child, I never used to think much about these because I grew up with them all the time. But as an adult, I was very fascinated by why these stories emerged. And so, of course, they don't have any base as such, but it's fascinating how these local stories are still communicated orally. And that really formed the basis for my book, The Myth of the Wild Boar. And I related all of these stories back to conservation and protection of the wild boar. So, yeah. And if it takes that to keep away tourists from the wild boars, I don't mind saying that it does lick away, human skins. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think in the myth of the wild goat, so you also talk about the human animal relationships and the conflicts and all of that. So, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah. So the myth of the wild god, of course, on one side there are the local people, and especially Tani of the honey collector tribe, who forms a very close connection with the wild god and the environment around her. And of course, on the other side, there are the human beings who we call businessmen or the corporates, who want to come to hill stations like Kodi, and they are more exploitative in nature. So that is also an angle I explore, where a company settles down in Kodi and they try to steal clean fresh water from the lake, and how that impacts the wild boars who eventually end up with no water. So of course, I mean, the whole story of the whole narrative of stealing water and all that, it is fictional, right? But then it does happen in another way, in terms of tourists, sorry, not tourists, businessmen coming over and building resorts and building hotels and building businesses and all of that, and not really having much of a concern for the local environment and the landscape, and how that construction actually hinders the migration path of the gore, the tar, and all of that. So that is the kind of message I was trying to communicate. How a lot of people settle into these hill stations, people who are, say, very rich and who can afford large buildings in Podi and construction and all that, but who have no care for the environment. They're not connected to the landscape in any way. And that is what I was trying to communicate there. So you see different kinds of human beings and different relationships between human beings and animals. And yeah.
So you bring in this idea of uh, exploitation of nature for maybe profits or gains.
Exactly.
Yeah. So why do you think this happens? Like, what is our idea towards nature? Why do you think we are more of exploiting nature today?
I think we have a great, so we've all distanced ourselves from nature quite a bit. And we no longer have a need to feel that connection. So we only want to feel that connection when, okay, say I've worked for 6 months straight and I want to take a break. So for a week, I want to go and, stay at a resort which is near a waterfall. But that's pretty much it. We don't really connect to nature beyond that. And I think that is where the main problem is. And that kind of a distance from nature is why we also have this indifference towards nature. And we feel like it can only be used for our needs rather than us understanding that without nature we don't exist as well. And the best example of that was the recent Wayanad floods. I think that really I felt very shaken after that, because it really made me think about how we should really, really, be on our toes and understand nature more than we have ever before. So
Oh yeah, that was like a really saddening and shakening like thing which
yeah,
happened. And now it's a lot of disasters have become quite common these days. Like we have floods also, droughts also, all kinds of things are happening. Maybe because of many reasons, we don't know. There are many reasons for them, but yeah, and also we even in cities we are taking over lakes and building apartments, or like also green spaces and widening roads. So all kinds of things are happening because of what we value as a society, right?
absolutely.
Yeah, I think it comes down to that. Yeah. Hmm. So how do you think the relationship of the local community with animals is like today? Like with maybe wild boar is also losing its habitat, so they must be coming to the fields as well. So like, how is the relationship like today?
Yeah, so in Kodi, the wild boar is not harmed in any way. Of course, people now in the local community are used to seeing gores all the time in their backyards, and quite a lot. I actually see pictures of wild boars rummaging through the dustbins, trying to find a bit of something to eat and all of that. So in terms of the local community itself, I think people are more aware that the wild boars can be found anywhere, and they are now more like normal cows. You can find them everywhere on the roads and stuff. So I mean, having said that, having talked about how comfortable the local community is with the wild boars, I think what is not happening is creating more awareness as to why they are there to begin with. So I think those conversations are very important, and that is what will help us understand that it's because of certain reasons like construction and building resorts and all of that, which are really impacting the grazing land of the wild boars. And that is why they have moved into the town to find food and water. So I think rather than saying, okay, it's fine that a wild boar is on the street, you should have conversations about why they are there to begin with. So that's very important. And it's also interesting, Ananya, because The wild boar is an animal that can be found on the roads and all that. But there are others like the Nilgiri tar or say the giant Malabar squirrel that are not as say bold enough to come onto the streets. So this is a visible problem. This problem is visible because we see the gores on the roads. But there are a lot of things happening to animals who are not really visible. We don't see them very often. So those conversations are completely ignored. So I think it's really important to dig a little deeper and ask these questions as well.
Yeah, definitely. Like, uh, so it's like if suppose our home was one day just taken away, then where would we go, right? So that feeling, how would they feel with it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, again, stories will help us empathize with these things as well. Hmm. So, and I think I remember seeing Yuvan Aves, he's another nature educator. So he had just shared something on his post the other day, like how to find the root of the climate crisis in 2 minutes. So you can set a timer. So take 1 minute and list out all whatever brands come to your mind, famous multinational brands, and then after that, next minute, list the local trees that come to your mind. And it's interesting to see what comes up because we've grown up around a lot of advertisements. We know a lot of brands, but it's hard. We'd hardly know about our local trees, our animals, all of that. We don't know it, so we've not been taught to look. We learn about so many things in the world, but yeah, we don't know much about our own spaces.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And interestingly, one thing I tell all the kids who I interact with whenever I go for storytelling and book reading sessions, so I ask them about Greta Thunberg and the work she does and if they know her. And interestingly, actually, majority of the people know her. But then the next question I ask is, so do you know any local activists in your environment? And even coming back to what you had said, like any animals and trees and a lake that you might have near your house, or a bird that say you've seen 5 years ago and you no longer see. So nobody really knows. So I think that's also a very interesting observation in the sense how kids also seem to be exposed to what happens in the international scene, but they have no idea about the local scene and what really takes place in their own village or their own town or their own locality. And it's really important for them to kind of be aware of that. And in almost every storytelling session I go to, I make sure to find out what they know about their locality and environment. And I have never been surprised with their answers because, all of them are, most of them are not aware. So I'm still waiting for the moment when I might be surprised and somebody might tell me these are the animals that I see around me on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think not just with children, even we adults, we hardly know much about our own space. Like we haven't been taught to, we haven't, been thinking in that way. So our focus is like, okay, let's get a degree, like let's pass out of school, get a degree, get a job, and settle our life. That's been the track. So yeah. So how do you think our maybe our through our education system or social structures or art and all of that, how do you think we can bridge this gap?
Yeah. So definitely, I think in India now, especially the past few years, I've been seeing a very positive change in terms of environmental literature and what kind of books are also being introduced in the curriculum, whether it's state curriculums, whether it's national curriculums, international curriculums. I see a lot of environmental books which are being added to the curriculum, or some are even recommended by the government. So it's very interesting, and I think there's a very positive change. It is not enough, definitely, because this is still a very small part compared to the kind of, and I'm saying all this also as an English teacher, how the kind of texts that we see, majority of the texts are of course not related to the environment and all of that, but I do see some kind of change happening. And I feel like the government itself is taking certain steps to make sure that a couple of books, extra reading materials are definitely related to the environment. But is it enough? Definitely not. And I also have The Myth of the Wild God as a grade 6 English reading book in my own school, the Aga Khan Academy. And so I think these are small steps where we can introduce children to nature. And I think it's not just about introducing them to nature. What I find very interesting about a lot of books that I read are that they talk about stories from specific communities and what happens in, so mine, of course, what happens in Kodaikanal, and like that a lot of writers talk specifically about what happens in their own localities, in their own communities. And I think that is very important, because again, when we talk about just nature education or environmental literature or say eco fiction, it's more than just talking about the environment or about nature. It's also about specific and unrecognized stories coming into the limelight.
Yeah, so local is very important. And do you think even in school, like schools, maybe children or different people being involved in different activities around nature, maybe starting a vegetable garden or, you know, or maybe going on nature walks, those kind of things might also help. Or, yeah, how do you think about that?
Yeah, those kinds of activities are definitely very important. And like you said, nature walks, and even something as small as, say, starting a vegetable garden or growing your own plant in your classroom. So all of those things are very important. And I think so one thing that schools really struggle with these days is, of course, the lack of space. I'm very blessed to live in a very large campus with a lot of nature and all that, but I know it's not the same for many schools, especially schools which struggle with funding. And so where are they going to get the money to kind of get that kind of an environment for kids to learn in? But there, I also think it's important to, it, a lot of small initiatives can be done, like calling authors over to talk about their work, to talk about the kind of, like how I do author sessions. Of course, authors can be invited to talk about the environment, the writing that they do, and all of that, along with, I'm sure that a lot of guest speakers are also available to talk about such things like sustainability and the importance of living a certain way and all of that. So I think guest speakers also play a major role here. And a lot of them are more than willing to actually come and talk about their work and share their stories with the students. And everybody loves doing that. So I think that's a great resource to tap into. Because again, logistically speaking, many schools lack the space to do large scale environmental awareness programs. So yeah.
Yeah, I think nature education is also picking up. So there's also one of the podcasts which is coming up, and one of my episodes which is coming up is on nature education. So there's a All Schools Can network which is coming up, which is trying to bring in nature education across different schools as well. So I'd like to partner with different schools and like just bring in different things in our own environment, what all is there, right? Simple things like just listening to our sounds in our space or just going on a simple walk. So yeah, those kind of things. Experiences help. So even maybe some of us, we've had some experiences with nature. That's why we are even in our childhood or even now. So we have some kind of connection to it. So yeah. And of course, imagining them through our stories as well. So that,
Absolutely.
yeah. So, what is your favorite story growing up? How did that impact you?
Okay, so growing up, I think I liked like a lot of very simple things. So one of my favorite stories as a very young kid was A Very Hungry Caterpillar. And the reason I like that story is simply because you know how the caterpillar eats different things, and then it eats a leaf, and then all, and the way the illustrations are done, they're very green, they're very beautiful, they're very colorful, and then it becomes a butterfly. And so even then when I was small, like a simple story as simple as A Very Hungry Caterpillar used to really appeal to me, because of how it had a small animal, and you know the transformation of the animal. So I really enjoyed things like this. And I'm also very lucky because in fact Zai Whitaker worked in my school, and of course she's been a very integral part of the Cody community. So even as a child, I had Zai's book as one of my readers. So Andaman's Boy was one of the books that I grew up reading. And I think growing up with a lot of inspirational people and change makers has really made a difference. So definitely I think I owe it to them to for my own interest in nature. And growing up with such people has really inspired me to write as well.
Yeah, it's fantastic how many people there are today. If we, once we start looking, right, they're like so many people are doing incredible work in different areas of their interest. or bringing changes in their own way. So yeah, that's like really beautiful. So it's good to also showcase these kind of heroes too, heroes, sheroes, everyday heroes to kids as well.
Absolutely.
So yeah. Um, so yeah, how do you actually engage with children? What are the different ways you engage with children? Maybe you do storytelling sessions and all of that, or activities. So how do you do that? How do you connect with them?
Yeah, so the main connecting point for me is not eco-fiction or not the environment. I never start off like that because I've realized that it has very less appeal for kids and they have to kind of unlearn a lot of things when it comes to that. But I start off with the mystery angle and the whole, how all because all the books that I write have that element of mystery and suspense. That is my starting point. So when I'm sharing the story with them, say when I'm talking about the myth of the wild girl or the guardians of the forest, I never talk about what is actually in the book. I talk about, I give them a story which focuses on the mystery element. And so I get them to be interested enough to then read the book. And through the mystery element, I also talk about environment, the importance of nature, etc. And of course, for me, the myth of the wild god has been easier because kids really connect to the wild god. They're very fascinated by the animal. They really want to know more. So that has really helped. In the case of the Guardians of the Forest, actually, the book is more suspense and it has more mystery than the myth of the wild god, but it's a little bit more difficult to connect with kids because it has no primary animal like the myth of the wild god. It's more related to, so the book has dark shadows that the kids encounter on the way, and nobody knows who these shadows are, what they are, and then they're found in the forest, and the kids are very scared of them. So that's how the story goes, and I kind of build up on that to connect with the kids. But it's a little bit more tricky weaving around that than how I would for the myth of the wild god. But the primary intention is always suspense, and from there I build on. So kids are always attentive and they pay attention when this element is brought in. And also, I never leave it off with just a storytelling session. I always do an activity to complement the session. So, for example, it could be making a clay gore, making a gore out of clay, or it can be just coloring a gore. And I'm like in the beginning of the activity, I just let kids color wild gores, and I asked them, "So, what color do you think a wild gore might be?" And the kinds of things I've seen are really fascinating. They are some even look like a unicorn, and some even have like a horn here. So it's really really fascinating, and I think these activities are what really leave an impression on the kids more than the story, more than the book itself, because that's what really stays with them for a longer time.
So how do you like reach out to even different schools and parents, to engage with children? And maybe you could share about how you do it. So if someone wants to reach out to you to conduct a session for the children over there, yeah, you could share.
Yes. So, Ananya, interestingly, that journey has been very difficult because um, the thing is, I realized that as an author, if you already have a very good network, then it's easy to kind of tap into that network and slowly build those connections. For me, I've started from scratch really, and whatever I've built so far has been really a very step by step process. So from going from step 1 to 2 to 3, because when I wrote the Postwoman and other stories, of course, I didn't immediately have that kind of network to connect to people, to connect to kids, to connect to libraries and all that. But on the positive side, I'll tell you what has really worked for me. Of course, this whole journey it has had its own challenges, and tapping into that network has been really challenging because, I mean, not all of us come with that kind of network already, right? But what has really worked is me learning for myself. So for me, I've learned what works and what doesn't. And what really works is going and meeting the kids. So, of course, I've done a lot of online sessions as well, but those have not really worked as much as say a physical, and my presence as an author really matters to the kids. So what I do is I contact different schools and different libraries, and now because of course I'm also a school teacher, right? So I've been able to form some connections with teachers and schools who would love to invite me over as a guest author and all that. But other than that, what has worked more is sessions at libraries, because I go there as an author and then I sign the books and I write a small message for the kids. So that is what has really worked in my favor. And I also think that the kids know where I'm coming from and what I'm doing and what I'm trying to do through my books. If it's just me, distributing my books in different bookstores, and I feel a very severe lack of personal connection there. And of course, just writing reviews about my books and all of that is not a path I would like to take, because I feel like that human connection is very important, especially when we're talking about environmental books and eco fiction and all that. I need my readers to know exactly what is going on and connect like that. So what I would suggest for all the people who are starting out, who are trying to create these connections, is see what works for you the best. And always try to make it in person and really see and connect with the audience who you have written the books for.
So what has it been like when you connected with children? What has their response been, and how is their idea of nature actually in general?
Yeah, so children, they are very fascinated by nature. They're curious, and like I said, especially with the wild gore, they really want to know more, and they want to know how much it weighs and how big its horns are, and all of that. So I think what is important is that we have to take that curiosity, sustain that curiosity, and build it to something else. So through my storytelling sessions, that's what I do. I pick up on their interests, and no one storytelling session is never similar to another one, because I always kind of modify it depending on how the students and the kids respond. So if one thing interests them, then I continue with that, and if something else interests them, I pick up on that. But like the positive aspect over here is kids are inherently curious and interested, I would say, as compared to adults. We are way more boring compared to them. But yeah, so just sustaining that interest and building up on that is a very fascinating process. And it's also an interesting process for us because kids also have a very short attention span. So in that moment, if you don't connect with them, then they're not going to sit through your entire storytelling session and listen to you. So you have to also be very mindful of that. But once they are connected to you and to what you're saying, then you have their interest for the whole session. And I think kids are great because they are really, they're open minded, they're open to learning new things, they want to know what you have to say. And I think they're a great group of people to work with and share stories with.
Yeah, so what advice would you share to other aspiring authors, especially environmental authors who would like to write more stories? What's your advice?
Yeah. So my advice would just be to keep writing and to not be too concerned with how your books are received. Because, of course, like I said, initially for me also, it was really hard for me to reach out to kids and reach out to people to read my books. And see, I was always sure that people would like it once they start reading it. It's just I don't know how to approach people to begin with the reading process. But it is a difficult journey, but never ever give up, because ultimately when you see kids with your book in their hands and them coming back and telling you that this was one of the best books I've ever read, it really makes such a big difference to you. It comes with its own challenges, but please don't give up. Kind of just stick to what you do. And recently I was actually having a conversation with a relatively famous author who had come to visit our school, and he was telling me about how many authors these days, they build a name for themselves by writing out of their comfort zone, by writing a variety of things. And so he was telling me, Priya, why don't you also try to write for newspapers? Why don't you also try to write for journals and research papers and all? And I told him, it's fine. This might be very slow process and I might be taking my time with it, but these are the kinds of books I want to write. And if I write anything else, it would be very forced. Maybe it might get me the crowd and audience that I want, but it would seem very unnatural. So I was telling him how it's important to also stick to what you believe in and to stick to what is original and authentic to you. So of course, again, to all the writers out there, I would say, please stick to what you feel you want to write, and don't get too caught up in marketing and advertising and who read my book and how many copies were sold, because that's a natural and organic process that will ultimately happen. But what is more important is why you write and what kind of a message you want to communicate to your readers.
Yeah, I think this is like a sign for me also to get on with writing. I'm also like, I had a dream. I also want to write some, fiction. I write poetry. I want to write some fiction as well, environment fiction, and connect with different people in different ways.
Yeah,
So yeah, I
that
think
would
that's
be
a sign.
lovely. And and I'll be waiting to see whatever you have to produce.
Yeah. So, what is your creative process like? I'm curious to know.
Yeah.
Or
So I am a very, very slow writer. The Myth of the Wild Gore is a novella, but it took a year just to write, and of course, another year or so just to publish. And the book only comes to around 100 pages with illustrations. So people are like, oh, this would have taken you very less time. But I'm a perfectionist when it comes to writing. So I write one chapter and then I make sure it's perfect before I move on to the next chapter. And that has to be perfect before it moves on. I move on to the next. So I'm not a person who writes a draft and then revises. I make sure that each chapter is perfect before I move on. And I also never force it. So if I don't feel like writing and if I'm not in the mental space, I never do it. I'm very particular about that because I feel like so my inspiration, of course, is living in the mountains, and because I come from Kodi, and I keep tapping into that as my inspiration. So when I don't feel like it, whatever I produce does not come out very well. So I make sure that I only do it when I'm completely in that zone.
so, in a way, you also write a lot about your own memories, right? You go on a memory lane and try to reflect on those stories which you grew up with.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the Guardians of the Forest, actually, the setting is my school in Kodaikanal. So I had actually gone for author talk back to my school, and when I was reading out those portions from my book, the kids were absolutely amazed because they could imagine exactly what I was talking about, since I'm talking about the school which both of us share. So it was quite an incredible experience, and I always, like you said, tap into memories, and I'm very nostalgic about it, and it's a very interesting and nice process.
How can people connect with you? Maybe if to learn more about your books also, and also to connect with you to come for storytelling sessions or activities with children. How can people reach out to you?
Yeah, so they can connect with me through my website. Yeah, they can connect with me through my website, and I'm always available on Instagram as well. And so they can just type out my full name on Google and they'll get access to my website, which also has a contact form that they can fill in. And yes, I'm always available on Instagram messages, and that's actually how most people contact me. So that's also a great option.
Yeah, great to know. So, any parting words?
So my parting words are that I would really like everybody to look out for my upcoming book. It's called Tulir Stroll, and it is called Tulir Stroll: Meeting the Creatures and Critters of the Western Ghats. It's about a girl who goes on a stroll in the Western Ghats in the mountains, and she meets animals and plants, both small and big, from say a moss on a rock to the wild gore, of course, and also very small things like the ladybug and pine cones that she sees on her walk. So please do look out for my book Today's Stroll, and it'll be out in December, and you'll get regular updates on it if you follow me on Instagram. So I'm very excited about the book, and it's also going to be a fully illustrated children's picture book. So I'm waiting for that.
Oh, that's so cool. I think you draw as well, right? You illustrate your own books?
I've illustrated only the postwoman and other stories.
Mm.
Yeah, the rest been done by Ashlyn.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Postwoman also that talks about the like
Thank you.
your idea of bringing in female protagonists and giving them a voice, right? So that's also I found that really fascinating that you told the story of the Postwoman. Yeah, that sounds like a really fun story as well. Okay, thank you so much, Priyadarshini. It was so fun talking to you. Like we explored so many themes, and as you can, it's surprising like how much we can uncover from stories itself about our own life, our society. So it's really, really intriguing. So I hope more people get to read your books and also connect with your storytelling sessions, all of that.
Thank you so much, Ananya. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a very long time, and I really like the work that you do, and I hope you continue the good work that you've been doing. And thank you for providing such a platform for people like me to share my stories, and I really appreciate you doing this. So, good job on that.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Priyadarshini. It was so fun talking to you. And I really hope more people. I hope you all do check out her work, her website, and I'll be putting the details in the show notes. So do check it out and share the books and the contact with people you know, so more people can get the joy of story, the joy of nature. So tell me in the comments, what is your favorite story? What is that story which moved you in your life? Yeah, some wonderful episodes coming up. So do like, share, and subscribe and be a part of our stories. Thank you so much and have a great time.